Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hey, it's Jackie Kashian. Welcome to the Dork Forest. You know the websites, JackieKashian.com, DorkForest.com, TheDorkForest.com, FamilyPetAncestry.com. You're probably already there. Let's do the credits. Mike Rickberg composed and sang that song with his wife, Sarah, that you just heard. He's going to sing his version of the Mexican hat dance at the end of the program. Patrick Brady is going to fix this audio, and Vilmos works on JackieKashian.com, the website. There are many ways to support the show. The Amazon link is one. You can use an Amazon link from JackieKashian.com or DorkForest.com to go to Amazon. You order like normal, and it supports the show. There is a straight-up donation button, PayPal or Venmo, to this email address that is mine, Jackie at JackieKashian.com, where you can just donate to the show if you like the show a lot. I think PayPal has figured out a way to do a monthly. If you want to go monthly, please do. Other ways to support the show if you want to is you can buy merch. There's Dork Forest t-shirts, and all the shirts are union made here in America, so they run a little big. Union Bayside, so if you want to look up their size chart. And then the other merch is my stand-up merch. On JackieKashian.com, you can watch me do stand-up, you can look at my schedule, and the stand-up merch, a couple of different t-shirts, a couple of different enamel pins, and all of my CDs and my DVD. If you want to live stream my DVD, it's over there at comedyfilmnerds.com. They have a live streaming capability, or you can get a hard copy of the DVD on my website. Oh, there are premium episodes at Bandcamp. TheDorkForest.bandcamp.com has probably 10 episodes that were done live. They cost me a couple of bucks to make, so I charge you a couple of bucks. If you've run out of regular episodes, go over to TheDorkForest.bandcamp.com and get some more. Other than that, I say this. Let's get into the show. Hey, it's Jackie Kashian. I'm in my living room with my brother. Hello, Philip Kashian.
My second appearance on the Dork Forest. I'm truly honored.
Welcome to the show.
I appreciate it.
You're staying in my guest room.
Right, I appreciate that as well. I just had a lovely nap.
Good call. Last time you were on the program, you spoke of Lord of the Rings, and it was a hit. I believe it might have been number 1 or number 2 of the fan favorites of 2 years ago.
Not that I'm keeping score at home, but I believe it was number 1.
I'm going to have a sip of some of this coffee, which means I'll move the microphone. We're going to talk this time historically. We're going to talk about something that you dork out about in your own mind, the memories. Will you ever do it again is, I guess, my first question. The topic, hitchhiking.
I can see myself at hitchhiking if I was in a boat. I have hitchhiked since the old hitchhiking days where I was canoeing and then I had to hitchhike back to get my car.
Oh, right, because you had gone down river.
Rivers go one way.
Rivers very much go one way.
Right. Well, in most cases, sometimes you can paddle back upstream, but in most cases,
I think it's an analogy of futility, though, isn't it? When you do paddle upstream, that's an analogy of futility, isn't it?
Right. Well, depending how strong you are,
Right.
Or like the old Zen saying, "Don't push the river."
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But
was there a lot of reading about the old Zen sayings when you were hitchhiking?
Yes.
Talk to me about your hitchhiking past. I have one hitchhiking story. Well, 2 actually. One inspired by you,
right,
and one as a child.
Well, I graduated high school in 1975.
Wow.
So it was
a different time.
It was a different era.
It was a simpler time.
But it was also post-60s. Little did I know, the first time I hitchhiked anywhere of any length or distance, I hitchhiked from Milwaukee to California, hoping to discover the summer of love. I discovered that it was over.
8 years. 8 years over.
Right. Well, and really 9 or 10, depending on how you really reviewed 1967. But it was an infatuation that I had that started from even before graduation from high school. There was an incident when I was 16 where I ran away from home, stole a bicycle, and joined a carnival.
That would have been 73.
Right. Worked at a carnival for a couple days.
You know, I always thought that was apocryphal when people would say, you remember when Phil ran away to join the circus?
Well, it actually did happen. I worked at a little carny outside of Slinger, Wisconsin. I had the opportunity actually to spend the entire summer with that carny. One of the local carny guys, I remember he said to me, well, don't you want to spend the summer with us? I mean, between him and 4 other people, there might have been 6 teeth. And he just
Right, you had all of yours at the time.
At the time I did, still do. And he just looked at me and says, well, you know, the great thing is are the town girls.
And at 16, anyway,
I ended up coming back home. But I think the apocryphal moment for millions of people starting from the 1950s through the 60s into the 70s, and perhaps a little bit now, is On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
I read that book because you told me to.
Well, it holds up okay. It doesn't...
It isn't. It's hard if you've done some traveling as a young person. Like, in the moment, it was probably amazing. Did it blow your mind?
It did absolutely blow my mind. I mean, it was
How old were you when you read it?
17.
Yeah, that's huge.
Right. And it began this passion that I had for being on, you know, it sort of gave me a intellectual framework or kind of a literary framework for wanting to go on the road. And it was, you know, all wrapped up into this whole infatuation with the 60s and with you know, popular culture at the time, you know, which it wasn't just books like On the Road or Simon and Garfunkel or movies like Easy Rider. It was a combination of things. It was the attraction of, you know, drugs, free love, you know, going on the road, following. Was
it music too? Were you much into music?
Not really, because, you know, as you recall, we didn't have a stereo when we were kids.
We did not.
No, I mean, I never listened to acoustic music until I was 18. And prior to that, it was my friends in high school. It was all prog rock, you know, Genesis, Gentle Giant, Pink Floyd, and stuff like that.
When I hear the words prog rock, I think the band Yes.
Yes, I saw them several times.
Did you?
I think one time, twice. But so when I graduated from high school, I was a bit of a lost soul. There was never a presumption of college. And
right. I think that they were just psyched you lived. And to say psyched, maybe surprised.
Well, yeah, there was a profound amount of indifference at home as to what I was going to do. But of course, you know, right from 18 on, I had to start paying rent.
Right.
And
that is the Kashian way.
That was the Kashian way.
Yes.
So the first trip I took, I hitchhiked from Milwaukee to Los Angeles.
That's bananas, by the way. That's because, first of all, how long did it take you?
3 days.
That's not bad, actually.
No, it was good.
Where did you sleep? Did you sleep?
I would go with a backpack. I'd carry a tent. I'd carry a camp stove. I'd carry food. I'd carry.
How did you? What was your stake? Was it from selling the marijuana back in the days? How'd you build that first?
The second trip, I actually was the following year when I did sell a big boatload of Thai stick. And
is that marijuana?
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
And made a little dough and went on the road. I think the first time I went, the presumption was I was going to look for a job and move to California.
But how did you afford a tent? I'm sure, was it a nice tent?
No, that came later. And most of I mean, I did the hitchhiking thing. I did from about 18 years old till 26. And got progressively better at it. It was a different. I mean, the history of hitchhiking is, I mean, in the modern era of the United States, is a post-war thing, because after the war, you know, GIs would get dropped off in Long Beach or in New York or whatever, and they'd hitchhike home. And in fact, in the 70s, it was
Really?
Oh yeah.
They were not given train tickets
No,
or
see you later. So they'd hitchhike home, and more often than not, if it's 1945 and you're hitchhiking home and you're wearing
your uniform,
your uniform or a hat or whatever, and it was very common in the 70s to get rides from guys who would tell you stories about how they had
hitchhiked from the war?
How they had hitchhiked after the war, and prior to that, there was the whole, kind of wrapped up in the whole, myth around hitchhiking is the whole history of the American hobo and hopping freight trains and
right. I think I missed the part about World War II. The hobo thing I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something I never did. I never did hop a freight train. It always struck me as I would talk to a lot of people about hopping freight trains. My friend Kevin did it extensively.
Okay.
And every time I thought about hopping a train, I would always think, well, you have to find the right train, and the presumption that it was, like the movie Starman, where you're sitting in a boxcar on top of, beautiful clean hay and it's lovely, was, according to what everyone told me, absolutely not true. It sounded filthy.
Right.
It sounded dangerous, not just from the people associated with hopping freight trains, but also, moving trains and moving parts and all that stuff.
Right. It sounds scary to jump on and off a moving vehicle.
Right. It was something I never did, and what I would do was, start out on the interstate, and that was the difference also between what happened in the 1970s versus the old, Kerouac, Woody Guthrie days where people would hitchhike across the United States on Route 66 or Highway 2 or
smaller 2-lane
U.S. highways.
Yeah. Often
referred to as the blue highways, because if you look at a lot of maps, the U.S. highways are blue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's 94?
94 is an interstate.
And that's
I-80 is an interstate. I-10 is an interstate. Many of the interstates follow the routes of some of the old U.S. highways. I-40, for instance, follows a long way along Route 66.
And it too is blue, right?
Route 66 is blue.
Okay.
And there's still parts of Route 66.
And the 10 is it also? I thought it was also blue, but
Interstate 10 is
on the map.
Is an interstate, but there's a U.S. Highway 10 which goes through Wisconsin and into South Dakota. But,
okay.
And there's a great book which I wish I would have written called Blue Highways.
You wish you would have written it?
Well, now I can't because some other schmo wrote it. But so the whole culture around it was, hitchhike out west, kind of like Huckleberry Finn. He wanted to light off for the territories, and that's what I wanted to do.
Okay.
So I would go on the road. Well, initially from Milwaukee, where I lived up until I was 19. And so I'd go from Milwaukee, I did it twice. I hitchhiked out to California. And then as it evolved into a kind of a cultural thing for me, I planned on doing it, I did it every summer for almost 8 years.
Until you're 26?
Until my first child was born.
So you would hitchhike from Milwaukee or later Minneapolis, I guess, out to California every summer. I
would pick 2 or 3 different national parks.
Okay.
I would hitchhike there. I'd go backpacking.
Yep.
I would decide I'm going to go to the Grand Canyon. I want to go to Yosemite National Park. I want to go to Sequoia National Park. I want to go to Crater Lake.
Okay.
I want to go to Yellowstone, go to Olympic Peninsula, and I would hitchhike there. And along the road, then I would sleep along the road, just in a ditch or under a bridge or something. And
with your tent?
More often than not, I wouldn't use the tent. I would just sleep outside.
Did you have a sleeping bag?
Yes.
What are we talking about?
I would have a sleeping bag.
Just a loose, just you and your shirt.
No. I had my rucksack. I would have my books. And it was depending on the trip. I also used to regularly for spring break, I would hitchhike down in New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
and because I like New Orleans, and I would go down there and just hang out for a couple days, and then
Turn around and hitchhike
back.
And so each of these trips would take 2 or 3 days to get there, and then...
I would usually go from 6 weeks to 12 weeks.
Okay.
And
then where would you stay once you got to a place? Like youth hostels or?
No, never. I would never stay in a youth hostel. I never had any money. No, I had a friend from high school in Houston.
Okay.
I had a friend from high school in Seattle.
Right.
Otherwise, I would just hang out. I would sleep in the park. And,
okay.
Like in San Francisco, in Berkeley, there were places to sleep, and then I would just you
just sack out. You just grab your sleeping bag or whatever.
Yeah, go find that. And I had a backpack, and I would keep a camp stove and clothes.
Did you cook?
I did.
What did you make?
Macaroni and cheese.
A great deal of macaroni and cheese?
A great deal of macaroni and cheese.
From the box? You like the craft?
Always from the box. Yeah, whatever was cheapest, because I never left with much money. I mean, I'll give you an example. I went on one trip once where I hitchhiked from Minneapolis to Milwaukee with the intention of then hitchhiking to New Orleans to Morgan City, Louisiana, to get a job as an offshore oil worker. I had visions of being a roustabout. And
is that what offshore oil people are called?
Yeah, roustabouts. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I thought
it's a great word.
It is a great word, and they are some of the foulest, most disgusting. It was a rough scene. So I left Minneapolis, hitchhiked to Milwaukee, mooched off the parents for a couple days.
Sure.
It was I had a very ugly incident with stepmother, and had to leave suddenly.
Uh-oh.
And I believe I left.
What year is this? Would have been before you were 26.
1980.
All
probably,
right.
something like that. Then I hitchhiked down to New Orleans. So I went from Minneapolis to Milwaukee, down to Morgan City, hung out there for a day or two, realized I wasn't cut out for offshore oil work. Then I just...
Can I please hear the story of how you realized you weren't cut out for offshore oil?
Well, I got a ride from this guy outside of Morgan City, and he's like, "Yeah, you should come on home with me. My old lady will fix you something to eat."
That's got to be verbatim.
It is verbatim.
Okay.
I've rarely referred to any spouse or partner as my old lady. Never owned a Harley either. But anyway, I ended up at his apartment, and he was a roustabout. And I just kind of, the vibe of the scene there were a lot of roadhouses, a lot of bars, a lot of prostitution, a lot of hard, bare knuckle type dudes where I was never that guy.
Right. You wanted a softer, sweeter bunch of people to hang out with.
I met a guy once down there, and I was hitchhiking from Houston to New Orleans, and I was talking to him at a truck stop, and he was not a. One thing is, I had a system by the time I was 20. I had super short hair. Mm-hmm. I would wear University of Minnesota shirts. I would stop regularly. I would go to truck stops, or I'd sneak into a motel and take a shower. I would.
You wanted to look clean.
I wanted to look like the kind of, and I had a very strategic approach to getting rides. I wanted rides from single guys who were going a long way.
Okay.
And there was a.
Did you turn down rides?
I don't believe I ever turned a ride down.
Okay.
There were several rides I probably should have turned down, from drunk guys who pick you up at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Or motorcycles.
What? Get on the back of this motorcycle?
Yeah.
Wow. You and your backpack?
Yes, and I'll relay one of my good stories is a motorcycle story.
Okay.
But but that trip so I went from Minneapolis to Milwaukee to New Orleans, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll go out west. So I hitchhiked to Boulder, Colorado, hung out there for a couple days, and then hitchhiked to Portland. And then went to Seattle, and then came back to Minneapolis. And I was gone for 8 weeks.
Okay.
And and keep in mind, this whole time I always had an apartment in Minneapolis, some kind of, roommate situation.
Right.
And that particular trip, 8 weeks, every single day, somebody either bought me dinner or took me home or gave me money.
Really?
Every single day. And
Somebody who picked you up
right.
that you were driving with
Right.
either bought you a meal or gave you money.
Or took me home.
Or took you home to sleep.
Hey, honey, make this kid an omelet.
And then let you sleep on the couch or something? Or
Yeah.
Nice.
Or they had a guest room. On that trip, I had a guy pick me up in Alabama or Georgia or somewhere, and he was from Chicago originally. And he said, "Hey, I got a place up in the hills. Why don't you come on up with me? You can hang out for a couple days." So I went up to his house. He introduced me to his wife and kids, his brother. They owned the ambulance, so they had a little ambulance company. And he was a good old boy. He showed me where the fridge was, told me I could help myself, showed me where the beer was, went out in the backyard, came back with a cigar box full of weed.
Okay.
Told me to be nice to his kids. If I touched his wife, he'd kill me. And,
fair enough. Do you know what that was? That was real hospitality. That's what that was.
He was from Chicago originally, but he was really a good guy.
Yeah.
And at the end of the trip, at the end of that couple days, he gave me a ride in the ambulance back down to the interstate.
Do you keep in touch with any of these people?
I did with a guy who picked me up once in South Dakota named Carlo, and this other German. They're both from Germany, and we ended up going to a Native American protest site in the Black Hills.
What year is this? Like 82?
No, it was 81, 79.
Because you did this till, what, 83 you said?
84, 85, something like that.
You were 26, so it would have been...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm rounding up, rounding down. But, that guy I stayed in touch with because my plan of that summer was to hitch out west, then come back, and then go to Europe for a couple months and hitchhike around Europe. And that guy was from Berlin, and I actually stayed with him in 1980 and 1982.
Okay.
In Berlin, and I hitchhiked pretty extensively for 2 or 3 months, 4 months at a time around Europe. And so I stayed in touch with Carlo. I have not. I wish I knew what happened to that guy. We had so much fun. He was such a good guy.
My ad. I'm about to do an ad. Rangers, this is an ad for the Function of Beauty. So if you go to functionofbeauty.com/dork, you get 20% off your custom formula. Seriously, I love this. It's shampoo and conditioner. I frickin' love it. I got, you pick. You tell them what kind of hair you have in a hair quiz. Wavy, medium, normal. What things do you want your shampoo and conditioner to do? Anti-age, color protect, strengthen, and deep condition. And then you pick a scent, you pick a color, you get to name it. It's all very exciting. But get this. The damn stuff works. It works so good. So what you should know is that it addresses all of your hair concerns, volumize, strengthen, whatever you need. You choose up to 5 hair goals to add to your formulation. Select your color and fragrance. You can opt out for dye-free and fragrance-free. I did not do it this time. I went with the milk shake. That's on me. That's on me. It is very sweet. I think next time, and there will be one, I'll be getting, I think, fragrance-free. Or I might go with like a rose or something. Here's what you should know. Function of Beauty never uses sulfates, parabens, something called phthalates, mineral oils, or any other harmful ingredients, because it's vegan and cruelty-free, right? Major drugstore brands are often tested on animals, and Function of Beauty is 100% vegan and cruelty-free. Go to functionofbeauty.com/dork and get 20% off your custom formula. Now let's get back into the show. Right. You ended up meeting a lot of decent people.
I met so many nice. You end up meeting a lot of. So the demographic for what I called the good ride back then was you'd have to get up early. You want to be up at the crack of dawn, which frankly when you're sleeping under a freeway bridge or along the side of the freeway, it's not that hard it's hard to sleep in.
Right.
You don't do a lot.
Yeah, no, I believe you.
Yeah, you don't do a lot of sleeping in till, 10, 11 in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. So you get up early, you'd get out on the highway, you'd have a sign.
Okay. Of where you were going, or
Well, my philosophy with a sign, or sometimes you stick your thumb up, but my philosophy with a sign, for instance, if I was going from Minneapolis to Seattle, I would not have a sign starting out of Minneapolis that said Seattle.
too big?
You'd have a sign that said Fargo.
Okay.
You'd have a sign that said whatever. So is you want to get a good 200 to 400 mile ride, and the way it would work out is in the morning, you'd get a lot of single men who'd be driving a long ways by themselves, and they'd want to leave early because they had a long drive alone, and more often than not, they would take off by themselves.
Okay.
Because the high percentage ride was a single white guy.
Right.
I remember asking an African American guy down south once when I was hitchhiking, and I said, "How come I never get rides hitchhiking from African Americans?" He said, "Son, we don't need to borrow trouble." He goes, "The last thing we need in our car," he said, "The last thing I need in my car is a white kid." So the demographic was almost.
How'd you get into his car?
We were talking at a truck stop.
Oh, fair enough. Got it.
And
So the demographic.
right, was single, more often than not white guy, on the road, leaving early, who's going a long way.
Right.
And invariably back then, you'd end up with a guy with going through divorce, a lot of Vietnam vets.
So they were just driving.
Right.
They were just, I'm going to go see my cousin who lives in Minot.
Or they got a job interview and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And I had a ride once from Lincoln, Nebraska to San Francisco.
Wow.
That was a long ride. It was a day and a half. I had a ride once from Jackson, Mississippi. I was hitchhiking back to Minneapolis for spring break, and I was walking down the interstate right in Jackson, and this guy pulled over, and this other guy pulled over. They were driving tandem. One had a camper, the other had like some kind of a van or a truck. And I hop in the car, and they were construction workers, and they were going up north. And so he asked me, says, "Where I'm headed?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Minneapolis." And he gets on his CB, and he goes, "Hey, Wolfman, where's that we're going?" He looks at me and goes, "We're going to Eau Claire, Wisconsin." He looks, says, "Is that close to Minneapolis?" I go, "Yeah, it's about 90 miles away."
Yeah.
So that was a good long ride.
That is a good long ride.
So typically, I'd look for a good long ride in the morning, and then sometimes at night, I would go to truck stops and look for rides with truckers. And 95% of the time, a truck driver cannot pick up rides.
Yeah.
Primarily because in most of those cases, they don't own their trucks.
Right.
They're employees, and they'll lose their job. They have insurance reasons. They have blah, blah, blah. But if you hid your rucksack, if I hid my backpack behind the truck stop and then walked around, and I got a ride once in Emporia, Kansas.
Okay.
To Phoenix, Arizona.
Wow.
Where I was going to hang out with my buddy Larry Sweet. That was the last hitchhiking cross-country U.S. Hitchhiking trip I took.
Oh, wow.
All right. So I was playing Space Invaders in the trucker lounge.
Sure.
And I was talking to this guy, and he said he was driving these little tiny campers from northern Minnesota all around the country. So he was going to Waco, Texas, and then he was going to Phoenix.
Yeah.
And then he was going to L.A., then he was going to Seattle, and then he was going back. He actually wanted me to go the whole way with him, and I was tempted. But anyway, in 99% of the times you would. The other thing about truckers is, the seats the truck drivers drive are real comfortable, but the passenger seats are like buckets strapped onto a.
Yeah, they're not supposed to have guests. Often.
Yeah, well, some do, and some drive tandem, but in most cases, it wasn't that comfortable, and you could never have a conversation with these guys, because I don't care if they were from Maine or if they were from Minnesota, they all had southern accents. You couldn't understand a word they were saying, and the CB was on, and the tape deck was on, and some of them didn't want you to go to sleep because they wanted you to stay awake, and
help them stay awake.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole experience, that 6 to 7 or however many years I did it, I got to really love and appreciate connecting with people and being that voice for somebody. Where I had a guy pick me up once in South Dakota. He was telling me about Vietnam and about some of the stuff he did, and it was horrific.
Yeah.
And he was, he told me, he goes, I can't tell my wife this stuff. I can't tell my kids this stuff.
Right.
And I looked at him and said, well, you can tell me it, because when you drop me off, I'm never going to see you again. Right. And
it's just someone to vent to some extent.
Someone, pour your heart out to. And I had more people. A guy in Oregon once who took me. He was going through a divorce. He took me home. He said he had some yard work I could do and he'd pay me. So I stayed at his house for a couple days, and he was so broken up and lonely, and I read him haiku and all this stuff, and it was a lifestyle that didn't just pop up out of nowhere. I mean, back especially in the mid 70s when I first started, you'd end up on on-ramps on I-80 or I-90, 94, I-40, I-5, where you'd get dropped, especially I-5, and you'd get dropped off on an on-ramp. There'd be 6 people. There'd be 3 people. There'd be 2 people. There'd be hundreds of people that were out, trying to find America.
Just going cross country, and
it was a romantic. Kids with copies of On the Road by Jack Kerouac carrying a guitar, and there was this whole culture. There were like notes people would write on the back of freeway signs, no hope, no dope, been here for 2 days, Bilbo lives, or Frodo lives, I always forget which one it was. But there was a culture, and I just embraced it. It was, I would bring tennis balls with me and juggle. I remember one summer I decided I would memorize Hamlet. And I would read Hamlet standing on the side of the on-ramp out loud, to be or not to be, whether it's just nobler to suffer the slings and arrows. And of course, nobody would stop then, because they go, what the fuck, man?
Right, that guitar, when you said there was a guy with a guitar, I was like, not a chance.
That was not me.
And no, you do not play the guitar.
No, and 95% of the time I'd hitchhike alone. I mean, every once in a while you end up with somebody.
Oh, really?
You'd get up in a tandem deal in the car, and you'd be stuck with somebody, and I never wanted to do that. I always wanted to go alone.
Well, did you ever feel stuck in the car with somebody that was boring or not interesting?
Who talked to you about, Jesus for 6 hours?
Sure. Did that happen?
All the time.
Okay.
Well, and this is a teaser for a future podcast on the Dark Forest. I did get sucked into a religious cult on one of those trips.
That's
where I
right.
Spent, almost a year with the Reverend Moon in the Unification Church, after which
up there in the Bay Area,
Jackie's parents had me kidnapped in the program.
Jackie's parents, yes. Russ's dad, talked somebody into paying for it,
right?
And
right, oh yeah, it was Aunt Alice, Uncle Harry, and Grandma. But that whole experience of being in a religious cult and then working as a deprogrammer for over a year I love talking to people about religion in the car. If they want to talk Jesus, they could talk Jesus all they wanted. I could handle my own.
Do you like to talk to our oldest brother about Jesus?
No.
There you go.
No, I don't.
Single answer. What's the motorcycle story? We're at a half an hour.
Okay. Well, there was a ride I had once. I decided one spring I was going to hitchhike to San Padre Island in Texas and go there for spring break, because I heard it was a spring break destination. And I got there and realized it was a spring break destination for every frat in Nebraska. And It just wasn't my scene. And so then I hitched to Houston, and at that point I decided to go to New Orleans. And so, because I was like going to New Orleans. So then I got to Houston and got stuck in Houston. And I couldn't get out, and I was in a very, very sketchy, bad neighborhood.
You just couldn't get a ride out?
Couldn't get a ride. It was like 2 a.m. I'm standing at a bridge, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to walk across the bridge. Because I had a I had a thing back then about walking across bridges, and but this was a really long bridge, and a big suspension bridge, and I was frightened. And so,
Fair enough.
so then eventually, and it's like a really sketchy neighborhood. So I think, well, I'll go under the bridge. It's probably a rail yard or something. I'll just climb over. And yeah, my days of climbing over fences, long gone. But
You were 24.
22, 23. I was a little more lithe.
Yes.
So I climb over a bridge. I'm going under this bridge, and then I realize there's a fucking river. Well, so then I go back over the bridge or over the fence, and I'm sitting at this ramp, and a cab driver goes by, and I had like $8.
Right.
So I waved the guy down, and I said, "Hey, you get me over this bridge for $5?" And he looks at me and he goes, "Son, this is not a good neighborhood for you to be in. So get in the car." So he gives me a ride. He wanted the $5, so
He took that $5.
he took the $5. He gave me a ride over to some suburb, and then the next ride I got was on a motorcycle.
Okay.
And I'd gotten other rides on motorcycles, and it was nighttime, and I hated rides on motorcycles because you couldn't go to sleep because you'd be sliding back and forth, and
For obvious reasons.
The driver didn't like it if you fell asleep. So anyway, I'm driving on this little motorcycle, like a 400 or something. It wasn't like a big hog, and he didn't have a sissy bar. So I had my backpack propped on my back,
Yeah.
riding along on a motorcycle. We're driving along, right along the bayou, and then he pulls over. So there's this girl walking down the highway. He pulls over, and then she gets on the motorcycle.
The three of you?
She gets on the tank in front of him.
Okay.
And the three of us,
This must have been, he must have thought this was hilarious.
I don't know. Oh, this guy's a trip, man. So he
What's his name? Any idea?
No, I know.
It's
But
gone.
so this girl had a fight with her boyfriend and got out of the car, and then he decided he's going to take her home. Mm-hmm. So he gets off the interstate to take her down this dirt road, and I'm standing there by myself, and he's driving this girl down this long dirt road to drop her off, and all I could think of is, fuck, don't do anything untoward that I'm going to be associated with.
Right.
And then he comes back and gets me, and we end up in Beaumont, Texas.
Look, he wasn't a monster.
No,
There's no parade for that.
No. I'll tell you a very brief anecdote. So we sit down over pie, which was my preferred thing to have these people buy me. They'd always be buying me pie. So we're having a piece of pie, and then, of course, this is pre-internet, obviously. He's telling me about the conspiracies of the Jews. At one point, he says to me, "Yeah, I'd like the Kennedys." And I looked at him and I said, "Sir, I think the Kennedys were Irish Catholic."
Right.
He goes, "Yeah, that's what they want you to think."
Oh my God.
So anyway, he was a good old boy, but there were several rides on motorcycles. I got one in North Dakota once, and at one point I tapped the guy on the shoulder and I said, "Hey, why don't you let me off?" Because it was just not.
They're not conducive to hitchhiking.
No, well, it was always great.
A short ride.
Yeah, it's always great to get a ride. You never turn a ride down. I mean, and there were a few situations where there was a guy once in Georgia. I got in the back seat of a two-door car, put my backpack in front of me, and I told him I was going to New Orleans. And as we're driving along, this guy pulls out this big, giant bowie knife.
Okay.
And he's looking at his reflection in the knife.
Okay.
And I'm sitting in the back going, "Oh, fuck, this is not good. This is not good." And then he says to me, a couple Southern boys, they had long, really dirty Charles Manson-like looks to him, man. And
yeah.
He looked back at me and says, "Hey, did you want to buy a beer?"
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, "Oh, I don't have any money."
Yeah.
I don't have any money. And so we're driving along, and at a certain point, we're pulling up to this small town, and I had told these guys I was going to New Orleans, and I just was like deadpan, just said to them, I said, "Boys, I need to get out right here." Mm-hmm. Didn't get hysterical or anything, and I just said, "This is not a place. I need to get out now." We thought you were going to New Orleans. I said, "I understand that, but really, can you pull over? I need to get out right now."
Yeah.
So they pulled over and let me out, and then I was like fucking shaking like a leaf. I went into the supermarket, bought like a pound of potato salad, and ate it. And then the funniest thing is,
Fair enough.
The next ride after that is like a family circus moment. These people pull over in a Winnebago, mom and dad and you never, ever got fucking rides in Winnebagos.
Right.
They pull over in their Winnebago. I get in their Winnebago.
An entire family.
Entire family. They give me like a milkshake, and they got peaches, and they're like, "Are you a college student?" I'm like, "Yeah." Would you ever have any dangerous rides? Oh no, they're all like you guys. They're all just lovely. I'm like, oh my god, this is. Or these guys picked me up once, and I'm sitting in the back seat of their car too, and we're driving at night, and this happens to be down south. I mean, there are creeps out west, too, but we're driving along. This guy looks behind me and says, "Say, do you know Satan?" I'm like, "No, I don't know Satan. I don't want to know Satan. I don't want to talk about Satan."
It's dark.
And
it's in the night.
But, as it evolved, like I'd mentioned, I did Europe a couple times, extensively. I hitchhiked once from Brindisi, Italy to Amsterdam with no money and no food. That took 5 days.
Yeah.
But I got to the point where, I once hitchhiked. I read The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck and decided I would hitchhike the route that the Joad family drove.
Okay.
And then I would get a job in the San Joaquin Valley picking fruit.
Okay.
And I would embrace
the sort of working class moment?
I would embrace myself in the whole novel of Grapes of Wrath. I'd hitchhike that route, and it was mostly Route 66, which incidentally was the same route that Ricky and Lucy drove, and I love Lucy when her and Fred and I forget Fred's wife's name.
This is a glimpse into the mind of Philcation, you guys. Here we are with Philcation, who, by the way, is just you're not on the Twitter, right?
No, I'm not on Twitter.
You're in the Facebook Ranger page, though, right?
It's Kashian, and you can look me up on LinkedIn.
Right, LinkedIn. On Facebook, you're in the Dork Forest fan page, though. So, I don't know. So I did have. If you didn't have any money when you left, did you just end up cutting people's lawns and doing chores occasionally? Did you roll bums? What'd you do? Tell me you didn't roll bums.
Well, no, I never rolled a bum. I never stole money. I never dined and dashed.
Oh, there you go.
I always felt like dining and dashing meant that some server would get stuck with my tab. Quite honestly,
Philcation's a good person. That's what this is the takeaway here. He's always been a good guy. You remain a good guy.
I remember once stealing on the road. I was coming out of Copenhagen. I was hitchhiking to Amsterdam. I had no food. I had my rucksack stolen. Ooh, we got time for this one? This is a good one. I was sleeping in the train station in Copenhagen, and I wasn't taking the train, of course. But while I was sleeping, someone stole my rucksack. Had all my belongings.
Right. Passport?
Passport, plane ticket, money, everything. I had my sleeping bag and my tent, which I was using for a pillow.
Right.
So it's a long story, but after 2 or 3 hours of going through several stages of grief, I had been hanging out in the Copenhagen train station because I had met this guy 2 months earlier who told me I could crash at his place when I was coming back from Sweden. And so and he wasn't home, so I went to the train station, figured I'd crash there, and then I decided to walk back to his place. Walked out of the train station. It was about 1 a.m. Everyone's got backpacks on. 30 feet in front of me is someone, I swear to God, is walking with my backpack.
Right.
But everyone, and I'm thinking, oh, no, you're being hysterical. I got right behind that rotten son of a bitch. He had my backpack on because I could see my sleeping bag straps hanging from the bottom.
Yeah.
So I got up right behind him, grabbed the frame. This is external frame backpack days.
Oh, yeah.
My Kelty backpack, which is currently in my garage. I pulled him to the ground and started screaming at him that he had stolen my backpack.
Yep.
Well, all these people grabbed me thinking I was trying to steal this guy's backpack. The police came. He started telling the police what was in the backpack. Thankfully, as every backpack has a secret pocket.
Yes.
I reached into the secret pocket, pulled out my passport.
Yep.
Opened it up in front of him and said, well, look at that, motherfucker. And
Bam! Nice. That's just the greatest story in the world. I'm so glad you. Why would you have not told this story? This is great.
There's a lot of these stories to tell, and ask any barista at Cafetto. And it turned out he took my money, which was $40. Turned out Denmark being a civilized country, he had to be in court within 24 hours. He said he just happened that was his money. He found the backpack in the back. The real funny thing is I had bought a book in Sweden, and I didn't have much money. So I wanted to get the densest book I could buy so I could get my money's worth. So I had bought Moby Dick, and I was 2 chapters away from the first day of the whale.
Okay.
He had thrown the book out. And so we get in the back of the paddy wagon because I got to go file a complaint.
Yep.
And I'm looking through the back. He threw out my stove, my food, and my clothes and everything else. My passport was in there. But I'm looking, and I look over at the guy. He's handcuffed. I look at him and go, "Where's my book? You threw away my fucking book."
Fucking monster.
So then
That's
I didn't
monster.
So I didn't have any money. So then I had to hitchhike to Amsterdam. No, I was hitchhiking to Homburg because my friend Carlo, who I had met in South Dakota, he was in Homburg, and so I was going to go there.
Ooh, nice callback.
And so walking along the highway outside Copenhagen, I cut into this little town, and it was right before dark, and I saw in front of me the gables of a community garden, and the sun was setting behind this like chalice, and behind it was everyone's little garden plot, and it was fall, and it was a lovely thing. I could go from one garden plot and not steal too much from one, but just take a pear from one and a hunk of watermelon from another, and then I went and sat out on the road and ate. So yes, I did steal once on the road, but generally speaking, as far as money, I would pick fruit. If I was out here in California, I'd pick cherries. I picked all kinds of different things. Out west,
for money, you picked.
Right?
Okay.
You do it for a day. You make 30. But literally, that trip that I initially started talking about was I left Minneapolis to Milwaukee to New Orleans to Colorado to Portland to Seattle and back. I left with $40.
Right.
And I got home with nothing, but nonetheless, it wasn't. I would go to these national parks and sneak in and go backpack, and
I think if you walk in, you don't have to pay, do you? Into national parks.
Well, you get a ride from someone, and then you're in the car, or else you just
Yeah.
There was always a gate you could either climb under or climb over.
Right, but I think if you walk into a national park, it's free.
Right.
But if you're in somebody else's car, they pay.
Right, and I would pick venues and places that or else like I hitchhiked the route that Robert Pirsig wrote about in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
I never did read that book.
Oh,
it's Andrew Solmson's favorite book.
It's a tremendously challenging book to read and a pretty...
Is there a window? Did I miss a window?
I don't think so. I think it holds up. It holds up really well. He's actually from Minneapolis. The Minnesota Zen Center was... he donated that with the proceeds.
Oh, nice.
But there's a tradition, in American culture of whether it's Woody Guthrie or Jack Kerouac or... Zen and the Art or Huckleberry Finn, the whole Mississippi River is a metaphor for escape, and that's kind of how I looked at it. And the longer I did it, and the better I got at it, the more I was intrigued with more than just getting out of Dodge, or hitchhiking, or thinking because by the time I was 19, I didn't get high anymore. I had really short hair. I remember being on the road once, and I was like 21 or 22, and I met this kid who was hitchhiking to the Rainbow Gathering.
Okay.
And I remember thinking to myself, that's past for me. When I was 17, 18, the Rainbow Gathering probably would have been cool,
Sure.
But, it's like the old Groucho Marx line. I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member.
Well, do you think the Moonies got you sober?
The Moonies did get me sober.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there is that.
That has to be an episode. We got to talk about that because that's kind of fascinating.
And it was, that experience was a direct result of hitchhiking. I was sitting on the steps of the Student Union in Berkeley, and with my backpack, and a couple people came up to me and started chatting with me, and they told me they had a free dinner, and I should come to their free dinner.
Right.
I went to the free dinner, and they were real nice to me, and I thought I might,
You got to meet people, and there was girls.
There were lots of girls, and then or women.
Because everyone was 20? Because how old were you? You were 19, right?
I was 18, about to turn 19.
Okay.
And then they had a little slideshow about this farm in Northern California. They showed all these people hiking, camping, and then after the little slideshow, they were singing and lots of, it was a kumbaya moment. And it was a love fest. And then it was like, oh, you should come to our farm. And I went to the farm, and it's a long story. And it could be a separate issue.
Sure.
A separate podcast.
Right, and the details to be determined. You'll hear them next time, you guys, when I'm with Philcation. Here's what I want to tell you. 2 times. One time I hitchhiked. I was about 4 years old, and I wanted to go to Parkway Pool, and it was too hot. So I stood in front of the water tower, stuck up my thumb, and a guy stopped. He was probably 16. And he goes, I might have been 5. Because he goes, aren't you Terry Kashian's little sister? And I said, I am. He said, why are you hitchhiking? And I said, well, I want to go to Parkway. And he goes, I'll give you a ride to Parkway, but that's weird. Don't do it. And he gave me a ride to Parkway. So it was a terrible way to explain how I shouldn't hitchhike by allowing me to hitchhike. The second time I picked up a hitchhiker was when I moved to Los Angeles. It's 1998. I picked up a hitchhiker here because of you. Do you remember this story? Mm-mm. Because I was like, don't pay it back. Pick up a guy, so I pick up a guy, and I gave him $5 when I dropped him off for a meal, like a Jack in the Box kind of meal. But this guy could not have been more confused why I picked him up. And at one point, he actually said to me, did you want to have sex? And I said, no, I'm just picking you up because my brother used to hitchhike all the time. I'm trying to pay it back a little bit. And he's like, all right, well, you can let me off up here. And I let him off. And I told you that story. And you said, why don't you let me pay back people by picking up hitchhikers? Well,
and unfortunately, and that's it. There is no infatuation. There are no, I think most kids, when they consider a road trip, want to travel, with a plane with their parents' American Express card. I drive. Even though I don't hitchhike anymore, I think nothing of driving from Minneapolis to Montana, from Minneapolis to New York, from Minneapolis. I actually.
You think nothing of driving from San Francisco to L.A. and back?
No,
just to visit me, and you have work here, but you could have flown. I would have.
It probably would have been cheaper.
I do.
It probably would have been cheaper.
For sure.
And it's.
You still like the open road.
I never see any hitchhikers.
You don't see them.
I picked up a guy a few months ago when I was driving back from Montana. It's for God's sakes, there are places to take showers. Are we almost at 60?
We're at 50.
Oh, well, then I started telling a story when we first started talking about this guy that I met in Houston or in Beaumont, and I was hitchhiking to New Orleans, and he was a roadie guy. He was
the guy who picked you up?
No, this guy was talking at a truck stop, and he's like, yeah, man, it's taken me 2 days to get here from Dallas. And I looked at him and I just said, you could try a little soap and water.
Yeah.
I said, you got to look. And he looks at me and he goes, you know what? You're just a tourist on the road, man. And I looked at him back and I said, yeah, but I'm the tourist who's getting rides.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's funny is that same trip, it was like a bookend. I met this guy who's like right out of one of those hobo documentaries. He had a little suitcase that was like one of those paper clapboard suitcases.
Full on square?
Full on.
Like square with like hooks? And
yeah. And he opened it up while I was talking to him, and he had his socks and underwear and shirts in there all folded up real neat. And he was a hobo.
And he was a guy that lived on the road.
He was he had been.
Was he clean?
Yep. And he knew how to.
That guy wasn't a tourist, and he knew about soap and water.
Right. And I'm just grateful that the hotel scene now on the American Road where you get the free breakfasts. that didn't exist back then.
Right.
I might still be on the road.
Yes.
Going for the waffles.
The cup of waffle. It's. I remember telling you about it, and you're going, you've been lamenting that wasn't created when you were on the road for decades.
Even now, there have been a couple times where I've slept. My current configuration for traveling is I have a Toyota Tacoma pickup with a bunk built into the back that's wired for electricity. I can crawl in the back. The real irony back then...
You know what else I saw? That you have a Delta Amex card. Wow, would I recommend you just kind of slide that guy and get yourself into a Hampton Inn.
I will tell you, my flight to Minneapolis and back, I'll be sitting up front.
Are you going on first class?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I don't mind sleeping in the back of the truck.
The back of the truck doesn't bug you, but you don't want to sit for 3 hours in a small chair.
Right. I won't refer to them as cattle because this is going out to the masses.
Right. And the masses, we're flying coach. Granted, we're flying to France.
Right.
So I am sitting, this is a very much first world problem.
Right.
Anyway.
But, right now I have the pickup and I sleep in the back. Mm-hmm. And
is it comfortable in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I'm single.
Well, there's that. I mean, the thing, you got to crawl back there, and there's all this wrestling match that happens when you're in some sort of weird bunk like that.
It's not a coffin. There's plenty of headroom.
Right, you got the cap on top,
right.
So you can sit up.
Right, barely.
Right,
but, you can lay down very comfortably.
But there's not like you can throw your feet over and stand up.
No, there'll be no standing. However, it's better than sleeping under a bridge.
You are correct.
And sleeping under a bridge is better when you need it than not having a bridge.
The no bridge? Just a ditch?
A ditch.
Better than a ditch?
I once spent 2 days sitting on an island in the middle of a highway island, waiting for a ride in Cologne, Germany. And it was freeways like L.A. And that was the other thing. The other thing I learned about going on the road are little things. Like if you're going to be hitchhiking in Chicago, for instance, and you're going to Milwaukee, and someone's going to drop you off in downtown Chicago at 7 o'clock p.m.,
yeah,
you tell them, if it's way south of Chicago, that, nope, drop me off here because I need a ride tomorrow all the way to Milwaukee or all the way to Racine. I'm not getting dropped off in the heart of an inner city. There was one time I got dropped off by a semi-truck driver right in front of Elliot and Nancy's house.
In the truck?
Yep.
Wow.
And, me and Dad had a thing when I would hitchhike back and forth from Minneapolis to Milwaukee.
Right.
Where he would give me a boost. He'd get me out past Highway 100 so I could get started.
Oh, okay. Because you know what? Remember when Dad used to love to drive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I drove with him recently. It was terrifying.
Oh, he's not a good driver, and he's never been one.
Well,
but he did love the long drive.
Yeah, he would give me a ride out past 894.
Okay.
So I could then have a good...
Past the loop.
Yeah, because that was always a hassle, because when we lived when Nancy and Elliot lived on 17th Avenue in Walnut, they don't live there now, so there'll be no stalking.
Feel free to go look at the old farmhouse in South
I like driving
Milwaukee.
by it myself. But I would walk up to Rawson Avenue, then hitchhike down Rawson Avenue to the freeway, because sometimes I wouldn't get a ride.
Right.
But more often than not, Dad would give me a ride, give me a boost.
Do you know what that is? That's parenting. On the most...
It's a different era of parenting. Yeah.
I don't even know we'd call it parenting.
Yeah, I mean, they were always...
It feels like the least he could do. And if there's something Dad does, it's the least he could do.
It was, it wasn't like he gave me a 20 after he dropped me off either.
But, right, there was no cash.
But it was our little thing. He'd give me a boost, and I hitchhiked from Minneapolis.
It's like having a catch with him.
Right.
But it was a boost.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we never did play catch. Yeah, I probably have hitchhiked from Minneapolis to Milwaukee 100 times.
Yeah. And you've probably driven from Minneapolis to Milwaukee 100 times in the last 2 years. 300
times. Yeah, no, it's.
We had lunch last Sunday.
Yes.
That you just drove down from Minneapolis. Well, you and your fishing rod. So you didn't fish back then, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
No, I didn't fish at all. I used to go off into the wilderness. I'd bring a copy of Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and maybe Han Chan's Cold Mountain Poems, and I'd go up in the mountains and
think
and meditate. I'd bring a little bottle of whiskey and bagels and cream cheese and macaroni and cheese.
It's a bucolic life you were living right there.
There's a Buddhist term called Bodhisattva about a wandering mystic who does good deeds for people. And if you read Jack Kerouac, if you read Dharma Bums, if you read On the Road, that's what Jack's, in his best moments, that's what Jack wanted to be.
Right. And is that what you wanted to be?
Yeah.
In your best moments? Yeah. I believe it.
It's what I still want to be.
Oh, fair enough.
Right.
Look at your list. You got a couple minutes here. Is there anything that you, any last words that you'd like to tell the Rangers of the Dork Forest? We're talking with my brother, Phil Kashian, about hitchhiking and being on the road.
It's,
you see anything on that list?
It cannot be understated what kind of an impact. I just recently read a book about the history of the Grateful Dead. Mm-hmm. It cannot be understated the impact that Jack Kerouac had on popular culture in the 1950s and 60s. It's
huge.
It's a male-dominated kind of obnoxious book in many ways.
How does it? Have you read it recently? Mm-hmm. Does it hold up?
It holds up as long as you keep it in cultural context.
Fair enough. And you can skim over some troubled parts.
Well, the troubled parts aren't that horrible, but if you look at Bob Dylan, if you look at the Grateful Dead, if you look at popular culture as a post-war American writer, Jack Kerouac had an unbelievable impact on our culture.
And how old were you when you first read it? 17?
17.
I read Illusions by Richard Bach when I was 19.
I know, it was Dad's thing, that book. He had
Dad?
Yeah.
Dad loved the Illusions?
Isn't it the one with the seagull?
No, that's Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Oh, yeah, Dad loved
Dad loved Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Yeah.
This is an insight into Elliotation, everybody out there. Rangers. I never read Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I read Illusions, and I spent one summer, the summer I worked in the Dells, the Wisconsin Dells, believing essentially in the Think system, which is from The Music Man, and was revisited by that woman who wrote The Secret. Illusions was essentially The Secret, but written in 1974 or whatever. There's some books that'll change your life, and that sounds like one that really, like The Lord of the Rings. That was your previous episode of the Dork Forest, and now The Road.
And there was nothing, and not Cormac McCarthy. That book's a separate issue. There was nothing more enjoyable than rereading Lord of the Rings while hitchhiking around America.
It's been an hour, you guys. Thanks a lot for being on the show, Phil. And
you're welcome.
Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
Right.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh, my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?